what's the point of having invasives program if the deer will have an effect on woods? So they will encourage the invasives because they don't eat the invasives. So they selectively, they push evolution of the woodland in a certain direction, and it's not in the way we want it to go. So I guess my concern about this is that there hasn't been a recognition of the value of the woodland. And let me back up one other thing, and I'll try to be brief. I attended all these meetings, and I heard three arguments for the actions that subsequently took place. One was an aesthetic argument. We're all unhappy to go down a lane and see walls of fences on either side. I heard that from several residents, and that's a concern I share. It's an aesthetic argument. The second argument was there's this notion of herding, that if you have a deer fence, then the deer have got to go elsewhere. And so they crowd onto your neighbor's property. It's a beggar thy neighbor story. No evidence was tendered that this is true. And in fact, if you look at the scientific literature, you see that they only talk about deer density. They don't talk about absolute numbers. They only talk about deer density. Deer density has to be supported by the botanic life. And if there's less browse available, the population will change and reduce over time to what is available to eat. Nature will take care of that in some form. Yet, no evidence was tendered to indicate that herding was real, no data, and yet it's one of the arguments for bringing down deer fences, woodland protection fences. The last argument I didn't clearly understand. I don't think it was clearly articulated, and that was a notion of herding. That is, because there might be fences all in a line, the deer, the motion, the migration of deer through the woods is channeled into certain areas. And I think I heard one resident say that you sometimes see deer on the road because that's the way they can get by. Again, no evidence was indicated, and in fact, this argument was very poorly and very diffusely articulated. These are the only three arguments that I've heard in attending the 4 sessions that I attended of the Plan Commission. And so when I think of the consequences of the woodlands, I draw back on this and I say, why don't we encourage deer fences, at least for the time being, until we do something, until we find some way to manage deer that allows the woodland and the deer to coexist. I'm sorry for taking so much time.
Are you finished?
I am finished.
No. You want to respond first?
Well, I can respond to parts of it, Rich. Yes, there are a lot of people who came to this village because they love the woodland environment, and I do. But I also love the wildlife. And I find the concept of specious killing just that. And, no, that's my turn. I didn't. Yes, you did. You mentioned culling. And you mentioned population control. You mentioned both. So, one of the things that we know about deer is that if we eliminate 25% of the deer that are here, nature abhors a vacuum. Marty said the same thing. Deer will come in from surrounding areas and they will fill. It becomes a let's kill every year until there's no pain in killing, until there's no recognizing the tragedy of taking the life of an animal that was here before we were. That's number one. Number two, I seem to remember in the report that the RPC prepared that there was very little difference in the plant life that they found in many of the fenced areas and many of the unfenced areas. We discussed that, so we don't know why that happened, but it happened. I know that I'm in possession of a piece of land that's absolutely magnificent, rich in woodland, in understory, never been fenced, never will be fenced, because I glory in the progression of the wildlife through the woods as well. I acknowledge the deer browse. I can't dispute that. I also acknowledge that a lot of the changes that have happened here are population changes. We've changed the water table. We build houses. We put in impervious. We dump garbage into the ground to make the turf grass grow. There are a lot of things, and that doesn't just stay where the turf grass is. Those herbicides and pesticides wind up in our woods, killing our trees just as well. So I think the impact of man on the woods is as critical as the impact of the deer on the woods. And I acknowledge that both are there. And I acknowledge that both are degrading the woods. The basic bottom line is that according to the ordinance that's been in effect as long as I've been on the board, deer fences have always been illegal. The maximum height for a fence was 6 feet. It slid by. There were some people who were actually permitted for deer fences. There were many people who were told, well, it's illegal, but you can take your chances. All of those things are true. We're giving a bye to those people, basically, and saying, okay, you are the people who have chosen to protect the woods with fences, and we're not going to tell you to take those fences down. To encourage other people to do that, to turn this into a village of fences, I find the concept appalling. And there's one more thing that I'm going to bring up, and it's a small thing, but it really bothered me. I was looking at the Burke deer count from last year, and the correction on the Burke deer count from last year. And it was done incorrectly. And according to Burke, the assumption was that they saw 3/4 of the deer, so they were adding another 25%. If you look at those numbers, they added another 33.33% across the board, not 25% as was stated in Burke's own statement. So basically, there were less deer across the board.
We'll get to that later.
Okay.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
let's cover that later.
Yeah, but that's there too. I don't think that fencing is the answer. I think, yes, those people who have invested in their property, invested in their woods, put up the fences, deserve to be grandfathered. But I don't think that's something that I'd want to encourage for them.
Oh, wait,
If
wait,
I-
wait, wait,
Okay.
just a minute. Anything else?
No, I'm done.
I'd like to make one,
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
one question,
Yes.
just a very simple question. Is there anybody in this room, or in this village, that was surprised when they moved to Riverwoods and found deer? It sounds as though nobody expected them, and all of a sudden these animals showed up and started eating all their plants and stuff. And nobody, it was a surprise to everybody, as it is now. Marty Jones, she accurately quoted, said that when you knock out 25%, they're going to be filled. The nature of war is a vacuum. Marty Jones, to answer one of your comments, pointed out that when you take down fences, the area that had fences will begin to look like the area that was fenced, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't that say that when you take down fences or disrupt fences, it all becomes the same? To me, it does.
He said that they would all become the same, they would all look overbrowsed.
Well,
That's
I
what he said.
understand, but you asked
They
the
don't
question.
all look overgrown. I don't agree with that.
Well, that was his comment, Bill.
That's fine.
He
Okay,
also
I just-
said one deer.
I'm just surprised that anybody was surprised to find deer when they moved to Riverwoods. They didn't come to Northbrook or Skokie. They came to Riverwoods full of woods
And they're deer.
and deer.
But Bill, don't you think it's possible that they knew that there were deer, but they didn't understand what deer do to a particular property?
No question about it.
And I think really that's the issue, and I appreciate what Rich is saying, because really the problem is not the fences, the problem is the deer. Because if the deer wasn't the problem, we wouldn't have the fences.
That was the point I
one
wanted to
no
make.
one would be putting up a fence just because they wanted some kind of privacy on their property and have a deer fence. I mean, they wanted it to keep out the deer. The village